Good evening. Thank you for being with us. And you are here with me and Lauren, right? I'm Stephanie, sorry. And this is Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. Thank you for being with us.
Shabbat Shalom. Happy Friday. Thank you. We had to do things a little different. So I think I threw Stephanie off, but we'll get there.
Yeah, well, I was like, oh no, I need to share this. And so I was like, I didn't get it ready. I need to share it. And so that's what I was, I'm trying to do that at the same time. So we're good though. We're good. So
good.
But yes, so we are still in this book. If you've been following along with us, A Biblical Feast and the Return of Jesus by Travis M. Snow. Right. And we are on chapter 2. So if you're all confused,
we're backwards. We're doing it backwards.
We're a little backwards. So yes. So we're doing Passover, and this is the Passover in the historical context. Right. And then we'll do chapter 3 next week, which is Passover and the Return of Jesus. So this was a long chapter, but it was really good.
And it's funny because we're coming into, I didn't know, I would just be honest, I didn't know a ton about tabernacle. I mean, the basics and stuff, but tabernacle and Yom Kippur, you think you know, and then he brings in an entirely different spin. I learned something new this week, and it's always been in the background, like the themes that he talks about, or I'm aware of them. And I thought, well, he really dug into some of this, and it was a long chapter, but some great information.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I thought so too. And I've even talked to Ryan, who were co-pastors at our assembly. And so I'm like, I really want to use this book for all the feasts next year and bring out the things that we haven't brought out before.
Yeah.
So he's got the book. He's going to start reading it too.
Good. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I think the first thing I read here that I thought was good was right at the bottom of page 22. And he was basically saying that we really don't understand the Old Testament because of a lack of scholarly teaching. Right. And as a result, we don't really understand the Passover like we should. And he said, so our first goal when studying Passover should be to interpret the early chapters of Exodus in light of their ancient Near East historical and cultural context.
And I agree with that. And I know there's a lot, I don't want to have too many spoilers here, but he gets into a lot of mythology of the time, and some people kind of step away or push back a little bit of that. They don't want to use mythology as a history or anything, but this is exactly the point he's making, because folks didn't have the Bible written. I mean, the Old Testament wasn't written at this time. Moses, they went, at the time of Abraham, Moses wasn't even a blink yet. So they had nothing but mythology and the history of the world around them.
Exactly. To kind of shape. Yeah. 1400 years. They didn't know.
Right.
And so you just have to take it and understand that, like you said, I mean, there's things that were going on in their world, in their culture, that they tried to make the best of and understand. So it says we changed the time, but nope, we're at, we should be 5:00.
Right? Are we on at the right time?
It's 5:00 Friday. 5 o'clock. So I hope we're here. We're here. So sorry about that. If I told you wrong, maybe I told you incorrectly, but yeah. So anyway, so this has been a good, and the funny thing is, so you have to remember that in his understanding in the way he's coming about this, you're not going to hear about the lamb in this chapter.
I know. And that was something else, because you're like, oh, it's all about the lamb, and it's all about how they fled Egypt, and
exactly.
Don't even mention those things.
Yeah, hardly mentions it other than they ate it. And so
yeah. But actually, I think he went more into the bread part of it than the lamb part of it.
Yeah. But the reason is how with of course with Jesus, Yeshua, it was partially fulfilled.
partially
So
fulfilled.
he does not believe that was a full fulfillment. It was a partial fulfillment. And so the rest of it, he is building on the fulfillment that comes when Jesus returns. So that's the perspective he's going from. And so, and like I was going to say, just, he is actually trying to correct them and correct the people and the countries around them, like Egypt. Like, you have all these gods.
Yeah.
No, I'm the one. I'm the only one.
Well, I guess that it's important to note, we should mention this. He does talk about the themes. We think of Passover and we think of the theme of redemption and the theme of rescue. He's really touching more about a warfare theme, which, I mean, it's there and it makes sense. And I agree with it, but I never really thought about Passover as being a warfare. And then recreation, which we've talked about that before. We're aware of that. And I think it's great, some of the extra details he put in. But also God is a warrior, which is part of the warfare theme. And we don't think of that we don't think of that at all during Passover. But I liked the points that he made. I agree. I thought they were very well researched and explained.
So that was Nettie, and Lori is commenting as well. So we have a few comments there. And Lori says hi.
Hi,
and that's on a different thing. So Lori, for whatever reason, it's not coming through, but I happen to see that you were on Facebook. And so we're saying hi to you from the Facebook page, not from Lamb Network. It's not coming through on our comments.
There you go. Thank you.
But anyway, so, but yeah, so good points.
You know what I thought, Nettie, I wonder is Nettie the one that asked about we changed the time? Okay, so we change our time in America, and I bet that's exactly. Yeah. We do daylight savings time this time.
Yeah, so they probably don't do it. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, sorry, Nettie.
I've got a dog barking. I don't know why she's barking.
All right.
So, yeah,
well, I guess we should jump right in. So he does start with giving us a little information about Israel and Egypt and how they went in. We know this part of the story. They went into slavery. He did a pretty good explanation of what Pharaoh he thinks was ruling at the time of Joseph and at the time of later, there was a new Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And so he did a really good job of explaining the time frame. And honestly, when I was in seminary, they went in deep into this and just we don't know. We do know that there's a time when the Hyksos ruled and when people that weren't Egyptians were rulers in Egypt. And some people think that maybe that's when Joseph was a ruler, but Joseph was never identified as a Pharaoh.
Yeah.
So,
and I wrote here in my notes, and some of you may already know this, but, so she just said it's better for her at 7 a.m. So we're an hour later for her. But anyway, Patterns of Evidence by Tim Mahoney actually talks about all of this. And again, there's lots of videos on it, and you can find them on YouTube. You can find them on streaming. And if you go and look up Patterns of Evidence from Tim Mahoney, and you can find things on the Exodus, on the going through the Red Sea, because then they spend a whole hour and a half just talking about where they may have crossed the Red Sea.
Right.
And the other one's just on Moses, and one's just on the Exodus. And so and then one's on two are on Mount Sinai. So lots of good videos, but he puts the time at 1400s, like the 1422 or 1450 in that area of time BC. And that falls in line with actually some of the archaeology they found and all that, but they still argue.
Yeah.
They still
argue.
Nobody
knows. Yeah. Nobody knows 100%.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Patterns for evidence. Yeah. We've got somebody that said they've watched it as well. Yeah. That's good.
And it's an interesting, because it gives you, he talks to a lot of different scholars. And so you're getting all the different perspectives, and then he shows you his evidence of why he thinks that it was actually and in the 1400s, not the 1200s, like most scholars believe.
Very good.
So yeah, so it's different, but like I said, it's just this one made most sense to me because he talks about at this time,
yeah,
the Egyptians failed. Like they were not a strong economy. They were not a strong army. They were taken over after this because their whole army was killed in the Red Sea.
In the Red Sea, yeah.
And after losing, they lost cows, they lost animals, they lost
Right.
all sorts of things. They lost crops.
Yeah.
Their river was turned to blood. So
Right.
it had a drain on everything they did.
Right.
And as a result, their economy went down, their ability to protect themselves went down, and they fell for a while. So that's one of the prime reasons it seems like this makes more sense at the time that he talks about. But that's a rabbit trail.
No, very good. Hey, there was something you mentioned, 25, the bottom of 25. There was something in there that you liked.
Yeah, so he does that commentary, and you always kind of bring in the commentary, and I don't always read it. And so this week I read it, but I thought it was interesting because he's like, we kind of tend to believe that there was like they were in captivity
400 years,
400 years, but he actually says that the 400 years is in Genesis 15:13 included the entire period of the patriarchal wandering.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, beginning with Abraham. And he said this is also basically the historian Josephus holds this view.
Right.
And that and then he also connects it to Galatians 3:16, where Paul links the 400 years of Genesis 15:13 to the entire period between the promise of Abraham and the giving of the law.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I can definitely see. I'm not opposed to that. I don't think it makes a huge difference, yeah.
But he just says that Israel was probably in Egypt around 215 years total, with the period of slavery lasting around 100 years, which is still one whole generation.
Yeah, that's a generation.
Yeah,
right.
That was in slavery.
Right.
So yeah, just an interesting point there.
Okay.
And he,
So I thought this was a good point. I've heard this before and I'd studied this before. On page 24, by the time, the most important point to note is that the Exodus took place at the height of the Egyptian power and influence. By the time Egypt had already been unified empire for at least 1,500 years, the Great Pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx had already been built. And I've heard that before. I'd even heard by the time Abraham went to Egypt, where his wife, was Sarah, was given over. The pyramids were already ancient by that time. So I've heard people say, the Egyptians used the Israelites to build the pyramids, that the timing would not work.
Not those major ones, at least.
They were already there. The major ones were there. So,
but they were there definitely to build the city of Ramses, which is why we take Ramses and we try to find the pharaoh when that happened. But just like, when was it? Didn't we talk? No, this wasn't you. I'm like, who did I talk about? But just like Darius in Daniel, in the book of Daniel, it was more or less a title because there were a few different Darius that reigned. And so so sometimes we have to separate what was their actual name and what was a title given to different leaders.
Right.
But I did like this point there on 26. He says, at the heart of the Egyptian culture and religion was the pharaoh himself. The pharaoh was viewed not simply as a representative of the gods, but as a divine intermediary responsible for maintaining the order of the unseen gods.
Right.
So,
and I think that's important because that kind of kicks off this whole warfare idea that we're going to jump into. Pharaoh was their leader. Pharaoh was almost like how Nero and the emperors claimed to be divine as well. So did Pharaoh. Yeah.
And it also, we also sometimes kind of scoff at Pharaoh never had a chance. God hardened his heart. So how fair is that? But when you start understanding, he starts unfolding and unpacking this chapter, you understand it was to show who he was. It was to show how powerful he was and how
God was.
Yeah, God himself was, not to show basically that Pharaoh was not who he thought he was, and he had no control over the gods. Right. So
it was a fight between the God and I know, and we've heard this link, and he does go into it. So he has a few different theories, and he probably three main ones. He debunks the first he goes into it was just natural coincidence. I've heard this too. I've heard it on different National Geographic shows and things like that. That the Nile had it was in its flood stage, or it had an algae bloom, or it had red algae bloom is what made it turn red, and it wasn't really blood. And so he kind of goes into debunking that. And I thought one of the good ones that he said was the Bible records that it wasn't just the Nile that turned to blood, but there was water in pots that they had collected that had turned to blood, and there was streams and tributaries that also turned to blood. So he tries to
other areas of the city and country not near the Nile, they still were turning blood red. And it wasn't just water, it was blood. I mean, and it was funny because as I'm reading this, this was what was really funny. I'm reading this, and then my dog always sits, like, she was outside, but she sits right by the door where I am, so she can see me and be there. And I see her like just doing this weird thing with her tongue, and I'm just staring, like, what is she doing? And she just keeps like her tongue just keeps going in and out like a lizard. And I'm like, what is she doing? Then I see this blood dripping. She had actually, there was a puncture in the side of her mouth. So it was just bleeding because it's so vascular. It's just bleeding and bleeding, and she's trying to lap it up. And so I'm like, when I put my hand under her, of course, now it's all over me. But here I am reading about this blood and this, but it's sticky, it's sticky and it's thick, and it would have stunk. And I mean, it would have like started breaking down and being rotted. So
well, and he goes into that. He says, the next natural thing, of course, would be flies. And so he's trying. The naturalist will say something happened, and then it spiraled into all these other things. And you know what? It sounds logical. It makes sense. However, there's a couple of plagues that happen that would not have, it wouldn't have been the next normal thing to happen.
Exactly.
Like, why does fire and brimstone come from the ground, from the sky, just and because there was frogs? Like, it doesn't, that one doesn't always lead into the next one. So
there wasn't a natural order of things. And it also goes in on 27 that the age of Moses, when things happen. So Moses was, it said Moses became one of the most successful generals in the Egyptian army. So that means you had to fight. He was good at leadership and fighting. That's what he had been trained to do. So, but when he's 40 years old, he murders the Egyptian. So he, of course, leaves. We all know the story. And then it says the famous story, the burning bush, which opens in Exodus 3, is when Moses is already 80 years old. So here he is in the wilderness for 40 more years before God calls him to, hey, I want you to, lead my people out of Egypt.
Gotta love the number 40 pattern.
And it's true, because then at 120 is how long he lived. So that's 40 more years that he been wandering the wilderness again. So it's very interesting. So before we leave, like 28 and 29, I just had a star next to Oh, actually, I already said this because this was about hardening Pharaoh's heart. So,
Right.
and that's in Exodus 7:3-5,
Uh-huh.
and that's right at the bottom of 28. So the Egyptians, and he says why he hardens Pharaoh's heart, and it says, "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the sons of Israel from their midst." So he wanted the Israelites as well as the Egyptians to know that he was God Almighty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not really about Israel, and it's not really about Pharaoh. It's all about him. And
Yeah.
as we start moving now into the warrior aspect of it, so you got to remember, like, try to consider what their culture was, right? You had a pharaoh that was God and king, ultimate ruler. A lot of kings would go to war with surrounding countries, especially new kings, to kind of establish themselves and to show their power and might. So that's a very common thing in this culture. And so, God is going to go to war with Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt and the surrounding world.
Right. And I do like the one you and I had talked off camera about on page 31, because he talks about the plagues being called miracles. Right. And he has it in quotes, and signs and wonders, and they were performed by God's hand and the finger of God. And this language suggests that the plagues were much more than just after effects of a flood. So you already brought that up, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that we also see that, he actually goes into some verses that talk about the hand of God.
Yeah, I thought that was good, because I've done a lot about the hand of God and the finger of God, and it's always a reference to power and authority. Especially the right hand. Anything referencing the right, especially, is a power of authority and truth, because anything on the left side actually started developing as witchcraft and the opposite, like a complete opposite. So people even used to think that somebody that was left-handed was of the devil, that kind of. Yeah. Okay. This I thought was really interesting, because when you hear the story about Moses going and the staff and speaking before the magicians and Pharaoh, the magicians are able to mimic some of the things that Moses does. And honestly, all my life, it's just kind of been like, oh, there's just magic tricks. Like, oh, no big deal. I loved his comment. And he says leaders in Egypt were able to access the demon realm to mimic the work of God, which again reveals the supernatural character of the plagues. And so the plagues were definitely to strike back at the gods of Egypt. He actually says not so much. He'll say that's a very common teaching. He did list the different gods that were being kind of confronted. And he says, not so much. It's more that God is the ultimate king and warrior, but you can't not look at this story without looking at.
And at one point, these same magicians say, oh, that's the finger of God. And basically that then
acknowledge the power. Right.
Yeah, because they couldn't replicate. And then we also see this, because we see also that the 10 Commandments were written with the finger of God, the hand of God.
Exactly.
And then I looked up Luke 11:20. And this is a conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees about Beelzebub and dividing, house divided.
Right.
But it says in 20, but if it is by the finger of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you.
Right.
And so we see even in the New Testament, and again, that's the law first mentioned. You have to go back to when it was first mentioned, which is in this story we're talking about in Exodus. And so you have the finger of God. He's talking about this power that he has. And then you see with the woman who was caught in adultery, what is he doing? He's writing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And more likely, he's writing out the 10 Commandments, because that's
Right.
what happened in Exodus.
And the finger of God wrote the 10 Commandments. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. You have to put all that together. And again, it's just you go back to the first time it was mentioned, and then it helps you put them together.
Right.
So
look for the parallels.
Yeah. So this is really interesting, because, like you said, he does try to he does make the point in many pages. He takes like 4, 5, 6 pages to make the point that basically this was all supernatural.
Right.
And then I love this part on 33, because for 2 paragraphs, he literally goes through all the plagues. And how many of you actually know all the plagues? If you can name them by memory, try to name them by memory in the comments, because when Passover comes, when what we do with the kids is kind of like play a game, like with naming all the things, but then you also, you dip your finger and you name each of them in the like the grape juice or wine, whatever you're using. So it's, but until you've done that a few years, you don't always remember all of them. But he goes, imagine waking up in the morning and seeing blood coming out of your faucet as you turn on the water to brush your teeth, and then blood coming out of the shower as you attempt to get ready for the day. Then imagine thousands of filthy frogs coming out of your cabinets and closets and into your house through the windows, overrunning your entire home. Then imagine 1,000,000 mosquitoes and flies swarming around your head as you leave your house to go to work. Imagine painful boils popping up all over your body, over the body of your favorite cat or dog, or your own body as well. Then imagine turning on the news and hearing that there will be no meat available at the grocery stores because of the plague. A pestilence has destroyed every cow in the land.
That's right.
Then you get in your car and find yourself stuck in a hailstorm that turns your vehicle into shrapnel and Swiss cheese, as lightning from the heavens strikes power lines and trees all around you, setting buildings on fire, destroying crops, and ruining the economic infrastructure of your city for years. Somehow you make it home to find your firstborn son or daughter lying dead on the floor of their room.
That's right.
Because that's what it would be like for us.
Right. We
can't
even.
Was very eye-opening.
Yeah.
So I read it fast, but I didn't want to spend too much time. And so it says, when God said he would stretch out his hand against Pharaoh and the Egyptians, he meant it.
Right. And that idea of stretching out my hand, or the finger of God, that was a phrase or an idiom that the ancient Near East was very familiar with. It's nothing new to to us, and nothing new to Christians. It wasn't just developed for the Israelites, but it was a phrase that very common. They had carvings and reliefs of the gods and Pharaoh holding things in his right hand, and so it was a very common thing.
And he says, God went to war against the Egyptians and the demonic forces that controlled their nation. This is what we're going to see in the future. We're actually going to, because you can take Exodus and the plagues and overlap them with Revelation. And the plagues that were where they were centered and all of that. It's a very interesting study when you think of, some of them were centered on all of Egypt. Some of them did not affect Goshen at all, where the slaves were. And then some of them were only on the throne. And so we see that in Revelation, we see the periods of where they are. And but it's so interesting, because we have to understand that one day he's going to do the same thing, and the plagues that come in Revelation will be on the gods of this world.
I think it's important. I mean, God uses patterns all the time. It's nothing new. And so everyone gets caught up in what's going to happen with Revelation, what's going to be in the red horse, the green horse, all that. Honestly, we've seen some things that might look familiar. And that's kind of the whole essence of what he's talking about in the book on, when God returns, we're going to see another Mount Sinai type event. When Jesus returns, we'll see another, the final, finishing up of Passover. And, so it will look familiar.
Yeah. And God, and, Nettie says something about sacrificing your babies. I mean, that has been throughout history, and they sacrifice their children. I mean, and I heard, and I know you follow, oh my goodness, the rabbi on Alpha Beta, David Foreman.
Right.
And he talked about what the blood showed them is that, because you have to remember at the time of Moses' birth, they lost all their babies. I mean, babies under 2 were all thrown into the Nile and allowed to drown and die. And that was that was like a sacrifice, and a form of sacrifice. And God always came against those who sacrificed their babies. And it's still going on today, not to get political, but it's still going on in one way or another. But they were punished because God wanted them to see that I saw what you did, and you murdered babies, you murdered these children by throwing them in the Nile. So I'm going to turn your Nile blood red, So it was very interesting how he put all that together too. So, but yeah, so now we kind of get into more detail of the divine warrior,
right?
Calls them, and this is so interesting. But yeah, we've kind of been looking at it and keep giving you little pieces of it.
But. So he says, yes, God is going against, Jehovah is going against all the gods of, the smaller gods of the Nile and gods of fertility and God, all that. But ultimately, there's the idea in the ancient Near East of a storm god, or a god that would use nature to defeat his enemy and to conquer. And it's a common theme. He even gave us, like we've heard of Gilgamesh in different ancient texts, not just Christian texts, but other civilizations. And there's lots of references to this great storm god kind of, and I can't help but think, we think of mythology like Zeus or something.
Yeah. You mentioned that
he used a lightning bolt, and there are times in the Bible that God absolutely uses lightning, So that's kind of the whole premise of it, is this great warrior God. He's not only attacking these, smaller gods of Egypt, but he ultimately is coming against the idea of being the God. He's going to set himself up so that all of the area, all of the ancient Near East understands he is the storm god, that they're looking for.
Yeah, and I like this quote on the top of 38. In Exodus, the Lord speaks the cultural, religious language of the day, and he presents himself in a way that would have been winsome, compelling, and magnificent in the eyes of an ancient Near East audience, already familiar with different storm gods.
Yeah, I would say they would recognize these events, like, oh, this is storm god, Yeah. And I don't say that flippantly, like to give him another name or anything, but that's the culture of the time, is what they were looking for. That's what they recognized.
Because this so-called storm gods would have used natural things to attack the people.
Yes.
So
the idea of using darkness, or the idea of using
flooding,
controlling the animals, and at Ra, like when the darkness came over, they absolutely would have recognized, oh, he's going against Ra, but he's controlling the sun, moon, and stars. It's complete darkness, and then ultimately going in through the Red Sea and controlling the water, not just turning it to blood, but then also commanding it. So there's lots of elements that some people are going to explain as a natural phenomenon, a natural result, but then he's even going further and saying, no, that's God setting himself up to be recognized as the ultimate God.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I know when I have been facing the wrong way, but when in John, I think it's John, but in some of these I have it written down, but he actually kind of goes and I think starting of course I won't be able to find it now. But basically, like when he goes out and stops the storm, when Jesus goes out in the New Testament, and I thought it was in John, but he's basically the author is comparing him to Moses by the way that order that he puts things. By feeding the 5,000, he's showing how Moses, through of course God, fed the people in the wilderness. By walking on the water, he's showing his power, like parting the Red Sea and being able to walk through the waters. So I thought that was really interesting. He draws the parallels to Moses in his writings, and I'll have to look to see exactly which author it is because I cannot find it, but it doesn't matter. You can go on. So if I find it, I'll tell you, but it was like driving me crazy which one did that, but it must have been Matthew, I think, for sure now, because that's the only book left that I haven't looked in. But I'm pretty so the Sermon on the Mount is equivalent to Moses and Mount Sinai. So that's Matthew 5.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
So all of these are kind of going along with something that Moses did to kind of show that Jesus was the prophet like Moses.
Very good. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a theme that's been stated in the New Testament. So you would have to see where the parallels are. Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay. So another heroic military.
Do you want to go through the words first? I mean, are you on 38 yet, or are you past?
Nope, I'm past it. So let me back up.
So you want to go to those words? You want to use the language? If you want, go back to the God uses multiple times the word smite and all of that.
Yeah, let's do that real quick. Okay, and it's on page 38 if you guys do have the book with you and you're following along. But in addition to the plagues themselves, there's many other elements in Exodus that highlight a warfare theme. There's different terms that are used. And this is something when I was doing my book on Proverbs 31, I always said there's it's got a warrior theme as well. Nobody ever thinks about that. And the only reason it's picked up on is because very specific terms that are used that are only ever used to describe warfare.
Exactly.
So one of the words it says, for example, God says multiple times that he will smite, and it's the word Nagaf, Pharaoh, and the Egyptians. And so he's like Exodus 8, Exodus 12, and it's a Hebrew term used multiple times elsewhere in the Bible to depict military battles. So same thing.
Samuel and Zechariah. So it's cool.
Right. Likewise, the Hebrew term is also frequently used in connection to the plagues. And so he uses the word to strike. It's often translated as to strike, but same word, smite. And it's used hundreds of times to depict warfare in the Bible. Joshua, Samuel, Chronicles. So he's going back and he's showing us, we look over these words and we read them really quick, but we don't really understand how they're used in other places.
The military terms.
Right. Well, example, I mean, this is from what I learned, but like we say, who can find a virtuous woman, right? In Proverbs 31, but that word virtuous is actually the same word used to describe David's mighty men, right? It's the same word. So it's used in one context to describe a woman or a female. And then in another context, that same exact word is used to describe armies. So you have to do word searches. Don't be afraid to look up a couple of words and see how is it used. Because if it's used somewhere else in the Bible, you'll get a clue on how it should be interpreted in what you're reading.
Yeah, and then he talks about the word smite, but then a similar word is strike, nakah, and then naga, Naga, is assault. So all three of those words are used in Exodus.
Right.
showing what God's going to do and what He has done.
It says, I'll smite your whole territory with frogs. So there's one. I'll stretch out my hand and I'll strike Nakah, Egypt with my miracles. And then it's got, and Benjamin began to strike Nakah and kill about 30 men of Israel. That's another usage in Judges. And then Moses said to, the Lord said to Moses, one or more plague, and it's actually in that time it's Naga, I will bring upon your Pharaoh in Egypt. And so lots of uses with military connotation.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Then he goes into the hand of God in battle, another like euphemism.
We've talked about this. We mentioned it, but on page 40, he actually has a statement. It says trim, and he's referencing another commentary. Points out that these anthropomorphisms, the hand, the arm, the finger, the right arm, all those giving human characteristics to God, are used in Exodus because a warrior's hand held their weapon, and the strong arm was a symbol of power. So they were used in other cultures of the Bible. It's not just something Israel would have understood. Egypt would have understood. Syria would have understood. The whole surrounding.
He talks about Sennacherib, inscribed the might of my conquering hand. Right. And then he quotes the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose III, described himself as a good god who captures with his powerful arm, smiting Southerners. So they use the same language. So God's using the language that they understood and that they had heard their kings use. Right. But he's like, but I'm better at it.
But I'm better. Yeah, I thought that was great.
No, so she just said, is this he from First Fruits? And so this guy was actually, where did he start? Because it's on 39, but he talked about him before that.
He's referencing a book called Yahweh Fights for Them. So he's just using him as another author reference.
So he's got some quotes in here from him about that. So Charlie Trim is his name. So there we go.
There you go.
So moving on, that was like page 40, 41. It just says the Lord displays his strong arm, only not in the realm of fantasy, but instead with real fire, real lightning, and real hail, within the tangible sphere of history. The plagues were part, and I love this thing. The plagues were part of a shock and awe military bombardment campaign that exalted the Lord alone and sealed his victory on the battlefield.
And then he references how even the military tactic changes. Instead of doing this shock and awe, he gets laser focused, right? He sends in that missile, that final missile
to Pharaoh.
Right?
Yeah, that was good. That was good. So then he goes and he actually gives, even the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15 has military overtones in it.
And it's called a heroic hymn, right? That's something that they're all over the Old Testament. Songs that people sing about military exploits and the heroism of their leaders. And so this is one of the very first heroic hymns recorded in the Bible.
So he kind of goes into the first Passover. Then he starts bringing in the first Passover, and then he goes into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But he's just talking about it real generally. He's not saying a whole lot. But then he goes, like you mentioned, the death blow at the Red Sea. So now that's the final blow in this whole battle, because now he destroys the whole army.
Exactly.
So so that really would have taken their kingdom and just flushed it. They would have really had a hard time coming back from all that. So
then he transitions into my favorite part, which is the theme of new creation.
Yes, I love that, because that was one of the major themes in this whole story.
He did a really good job. He basically says, if you're going to read through Exodus 14, and you'll see repeated, we've seen these, like Stephanie and I have talked about this in other book studies, the language of creation. But if you read through Exodus 14, be sure to go back and read through Exodus 1 through 9, looking at the creation of the world. And then the same language is used again in the flood. Yeah. And then the same language is used again here at the Red Sea. So
you want to start reading a little bit on the bottom of 45 because then compare the language?
Sure. It says in Genesis 1, the creation accounts begins with formless and void darkness over the deep, right? We recognize that. The surface of the waters. And then God speaks light over the darkness and gathers up the waters towards place to dry land until dry land appears. We also have the Spirit moving over the waters. And in the time of Noah, the flood waters were upon the earth. So we see the waters again coming upon the earth. And then, going back into the idea of a watery, dark chaos, same type of parallels. And then when the water in the dried up on land during Noah's time, there was a spirit that breathed over, God breathed his Spirit over the water again and dried out the land. Well, in Exodus, I'll just go ahead and moreover, just like in Genesis 1:1, where we're told that the Spirit, Ruach, of God hovered over the waters. In Genesis 8, we see he caused a wind to blow, and actually wind is Ruach, to pass over the waters until they subsided, and dry land eventually appeared. And then subsequently, when the flood reaches a climax, the order of creation is confirmed again and again establishes another cycle of seasons. And so it's interesting, though, that when the Israelites made it to the Red Sea, it was at night in darkness. And then in the morning, like, let there be light. That is when God began to push and blow away and use the winds to separate the water until dry land appeared.
So the same language, the wind, the ruach, it's like all the same kind of language. So we call it creation language. So
yeah. And then they began to cross and then reach the other side at daybreak when let there be light and let the new light come in. The Exodus, as it turns out, was a stepping stone back to the Garden of Eden. And this is why the same themes of darkness, water, wind, spirit, dry land, and light from Genesis appear again in Exodus 14, particularly during the account of the Red Sea crossing. So I love all that stuff.
Yeah. So some little things that I had underlined because she told the whole story there about that. But no, it was good. It was good because you just gave the whole overview of the creation, kind of the decreation with Noah, recreation with Noah, and then you see kind of a decreation happening again with the plagues, and then you see a new creation with a new nation.
That's right.
And so it's really quite beautiful when you think about it. But he said here, when he's talking about Noah, he basically says that as a result, in Genesis 6-8, God sends a flood and allows creation to revert to the state of watery chaos and darkness. Right. So he says, with this move, God was basically saying to mankind, if you don't want to live in my good world, according to my laws, then I will give you back the formless and void world of Genesis 1. And that kind of struck me, because where are we? We're in a world that hates laws. We don't want to obey any of God's laws. We don't think we have to, whether we're part of the church or not. We kind of have this rebellious spirit that we don't have to do certain things. We don't have to obey. And he's like, you don't want to obey my laws and live according to my instructions, then I'll take you back to a formless and void world of Genesis.
Right.
So
Right.
that's pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I had like most of this all underlined, but yeah. So it just says he carries his people through the chaos of the plagues and the water and the darkness of the Red Sea. He creates order. So those are comforting thoughts. He carries them. He creates order. He brings them peace. He brings them to the threshold of his new creation.
Mm-hmm.
And just as he did with Adam, Eve, and Noah, and now he does the same with Israel at Mount Sinai.
Right. Well, I was going to say that too. He gave a command to Adam, the command, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And then he says the same command to Noah, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And then to the Israelites, they came through, they, went into Mount Sinai. He gave them commands too, not only fill the earth, but this is how I want you to do it. And he had the parameters put in of the law, but regardless, it's still the same essence of the command. The command was given. The command was given. So we don't really put those together as often when we look at the story.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's really good. I mean, I love the parallels he made and we love the whole creation, decreation, recreation language,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
I guess the one thing I would read here is that the third paragraph on 47 or fourth paragraph. It says the Exodus, as it turns out, was a stepping stone back to the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, that's what I had read. Right.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
We have the same things underlined
again.
Same things are underlined again.
Yeah. So, but we don't think of it that way. So
no.
You keep having like the same language being
well used. And think about it, he's going to at the end of time, and I'm sure he's going to go into this in the next chapter, at the end of time he is decreating. He's turning us over to the chaos again, right? And it may not be water this time, but he's allowing the darkness to take over again. And he'll lead us through and then give us a new command, and we'll recognize he also is saying when they came across and the water, the hymn that they sang was basically a way of celebrating that God is going to be their king. He's making that recognition. And then when they get to Sinai, they make the formal covenant between the king and his people.
And the marriage between
right.
God and his people. And a lot of us don't realize that they're all the countries. We've talked about this before as well, but there were slaves from every country in the world.
Right.
So they were all standing there because they all left with the Jews. When God took them out, they all tagged along and said, yeah, I'm going with you. And it said that even Moses's adopted mother went with them. So as an Egyptian, she was among them. And so they were all represented there. And it's a very interesting point that we sometimes forget that all the nations were part of this, not just the children of Israel.
Well, and there's so many references in the law. If you read through Torah, it's said, tell this to you and all the people that are sojourning with you. And this is not just you, it's your slaves, it's your
And it's interesting because he calls them all the children of Israel. We don't have any distinction.
Right.
Because they're all following him. So they're all called Israel. We don't see like Assyria or Babylon or whomever. We don't see these different people by country represented. They're all called the children of Israel, but they weren't all.
They weren't. Yeah, they weren't all specifically Israel. Right. And every knee shall bow, we shall see.
And again, going into the next chapter 3, Passover and the return of Jesus.
Right.
He starts, Jesus is the Passover lamb. So now we get into
more Passover. Now we'll get to hear about the lamb finally. Yeah.
But I think he's going to pull all this in there too, so he makes the point Passover has not yet been fulfilled. So it's not fully fulfilled.
Right. So I'm paging through really quick. It's a long chapter as well. I haven't looked at it. I haven't looked at it all or read it, I mean, it is. It starts on page 51. I'm already up to 71, 75, 77.
Yeah, but
It's
just
very
some of the headings like Passover and the victory of God.
Stephanie, we might have to break this one into 2 chapters, 2 days. I mean, I'm on page 91 and I'm still.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, it's a long chapter.
We will split it in half. You know why? I wonder if he goes through like.
Holy smokes!
Yeah,
I'm all the way up to page 105.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. It doesn't end till 110.
110 starts the 4th chapter, and that's
an incredibly long chapter.
Well,
so
because
have to break that up.
Yeah, he's doing Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Passover, all in how Jesus fulfills all of those.
Right.
It's going to be good. The next 2 weeks are going to be good. So
okay. We're going to split it up.
Yeah,
so
if anybody come in, this is what we're reading. And
if you're reading along with us, break it up a little bit. Don't worry about it.
Don't try to read all of chapter 3.
That is a whopper chapter.
So it's basically 50 pages.
Yeah.
That's a little over that. So it's a long chapter. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we found that out. I didn't get too far ahead, did I?
I have a big deadline coming. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read all of that. Very good.
We'll do it. So we're almost out of time, but
yeah, we are. We have a few minutes.
Yeah, so we have
about a minute.
Lots of homework coming up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we've decided too. I know we talked about a new book, and we're definitely going to get to the new book, but I think we're going to pause during the month of December, and we're going to just read the book of Luke. There's a big challenge that everybody likes to do, like read 1 chapter a day because there's 24 chapters for the book of Luke. And we have Andrew Roth's Bible that we're going to actually read from and study from. And
the New Testament.
We'll get the rest of the story. There's some really great details.
There's a great commentary in there about
Luke. He shared last year too. He was on the show and talked about the Bethlehem star. So we'll probably pause a little bit more about that as well, just to go back, because it's always a fun thing to do at this time of the year.
So so that's a book you can. It's basically what I want to say. It's the Hebrew and the English, and it's all he rewrites it
Aramaic
from the Aramaic.
Yeah.
So it's the New Testament according to the Aramaic scriptures.
It's great.
So
it is so good to read. I've enjoyed it.
In there, but
big time. All right. Well, you have the controls tonight. I do not have the controls, so I'll turn it over to you. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. If you missed today's show and want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all of the other live Lamb show archives on the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.